Japan, known worldwide for many things. Its distinctive gardens and architecture, the birthplace of sushi, sumo wrestling, square watermelons, and who can forget Godzilla? But more importantly, Japan represents the world's third largest economy, a net exporter of everything from cars to electronics to medical equipment. And yet its bond market and central banking policies have become wackier than a Japanese game show. It's enough to have spawned the term Japanification. According to some analysts, the Japanese economy has developed a troubling and unusual confluence of traits over the last 30 years: slowing economic growth, low official inflation and low interest rates, and a rapid and historic depreciation of its currency, the Japanese yen. This trend started with the bursting of a massive real estate and equity market bubble in the early 1990s.
The land bubble in Japan, it was insane. I mean, we're talking about like one city in Japan was worth more than all of California at the time. So it was an extremely big bubble in asset prices due to the easy monetary policies of the Bank of Japan. And then it popped, and Japan in general has never recovered from that pop.
A sustained period of stagnation gave rise to another invention, and perhaps you didn't know it originated in Japan: quantitative easing, aka printing money to buy government debt, also known as money printer go burr. Currently, the debt to GDP ratio in Japan is a staggering 266%, the highest of any developed nation. Almost half of this debt held by its central bank, the Bank of Japan.
I mean, it's comical, right? They're basically printing money, printing yen, and buying their own bonds.
QE is an idea that caught on with other central banks around the world, doing the same, including, you guessed it, the US Federal Reserve.
Unfortunately, all the central banks around the world took the Japan playbook to heart over the last couple of years, and we've seen them do very, very similar things when they were faced with that dilemma as well during a crisis.
So the question is, does Japan have some unique characteristics that make it especially able to endure persistent headwinds indefinitely? Or is Japan simply closer to the drain that many central banks are circling in this inevitable dystopian modern monetary debt spiral?
Japan is the preview movie for the whole rest of the world, especially in terms of demographics. So if you think about the percent of population that's over, say, age 65, what that does to consumption, what that does to inflation, what that does to labor force participation.
This just shows the tremendous pressure the manipulation of their monetary policy is having on their debt markets. They're kicking the can down the road to maintain this monetary manipulation.
Keep kicking the can down the road, and the next stop is inevitably yield curve control.
The Bank of Japan, a number of months ago, had declared that they were going to hold their 10-year rates at a certain level, which was 0.25%. Now, everybody else in the world, Bank of England, the ECB, the US, everybody's raising rates, and Japan is holding theirs just barely over water. So the 10-year was being held at 0.25%. It's called yield curve control.
When a central bank has yield curve control, it's really hard to stop the yield curve control without being a very disruptive change. Think about it as like they're trying to hold a beach ball underwater. And once they let that go, you can lose control of the yields and they just shoot up, because basically yield curve control depends on the credibility of the Bank of Japan. They're saying, hey, we will buy an unlimited amount of bonds to not let yields go above 0.25%.
In very indebted countries, as long as that debt is denominated in their own currency, which is the case for developed countries, they can override the long end of the curve too, not just the short end. It's considered more extreme policy.
In December 2022, the Bank of Japan announced a change to its 0.25%, also known as 25 basis points interest rate cap on the 10-year bond, raising it to 50 basis points and taking the markets by surprise.
Nobody predicted that Japan would finally blink, because we were saying that Japan's going to try to hold out as long as they can, hope that the Fed blinks and starts lowering rates before Japan has to stop their control, right? And so that's essentially what happened. They moved that benchmark, they moved the peg from 25 basis points to 50 basis points, and everybody freaked out.
The Bank of Japan, therefore, finds itself in an awkward place.
They're kind of adjusting back up to a more maintainable level, but they have to reestablish credibility because people can say, well, if they changed it once, why can't they change it again?
But it's not just the BOJ. All central banks only have so many weapons in their arsenals.
I think the Fed and other central banks are caught in a very difficult position here. Because on the one hand, they can't announce too loudly they have no tools left. Because part of the magic of central banking is to pretend that you have a bazooka behind your back that you can bring out, and to prevent expectations from disintegrating.
So where does this yield curve control bond buying bonanza at the currency's expense end? There's an old Japanese proverb that translates to even monkeys fall from trees, and it basically means even experts can make mistakes, and there are many self-anointed economic experts in central banks around the world.
I don't think it's even possible for them to stop. And I think where this ends is a complete breakdown in trust in the currency, in the yen.
Are central bankers capable of anticipating the right amount of money in an economy? Or could it be that a return to sound money, the kind that can't be inflated away, might not be such a bad idea? Could it be that Bitcoin, whose supply is governed by a system of rules and not rulers, is such a money? Bitcoin critics may have coined the term magic internet money, but magic is what they're calling something they don't understand. When you do understand Bitcoin in all its mathematic, thermodynamic perfection, the answer to these questions seems pretty obvious.
As we go into this kind of recession with rates rising, you want to hold hard monies, things like gold and silver and Bitcoin. You want to own those assets that will store your value.